Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this session of the UN Responsible Business and Human Rights Forum on Unseen, Undervalued Domestic Work, Essential for All Business, Why Responsible Business Should Care About Care Work. This session is jointly organized by the International Organization for Migration, IOM, and UN Women. I am excited to introduce you to our impressive lineup of speakers. But first, please indulge me while I provide important background for today's discussion. According to the ILO, 1 in every 13 women wage earners work as domestic workers. There are 67 million domestic workers, and 1 in 6 are international migrant workers, with close to half in this region. 73% of all migrant domestic workers are women. As a highly feminized sector, domestic work in Asia provides important economic and empowerment opportunities for many women migrants. For the first time at this 2021 forum, we can raise the significance of domestic workers in the spheres of business and human rights, which has long been neglected. This year also marks the 10th anniversary of the Domestic Workers Convention, C-189, which is an international, legally binding instrument protecting and promoting the fundamental principles and rights at work of domestic workers, adding another layer of significance to today's discussion. Like much of women's work, or in fact, the work in which women are predominantly employed, the value and substantive contributions of migrant domestic workers are underappreciated. Often workers who perform domestic housework or care work are excluded from labor protection. 40% of national labor laws in countries worldwide do not offer protections for domestic workers. Domestic workers contribute significantly to the global economy, especially allowing greater scope of care to aging populations, children, and persons living with disabilities. Indeed, many companies, from small enterprises to multinational corporations, directly benefit from having a productive workforce because of the domestic workers their staff employ at home. The increasing employment of domestic workers has resulted in a noticeable increase in the women labor force for participation rate in Asia. Furthermore, as costs of living rise, especially in urban areas, and families must rely on multiple wage earners, migrant domestic workers have helped many parents to stay economically active. According to a study on the economic contribution of migrant domestic workers to the economies where they are living and working, in 2018, migrant domestic workers contributed an estimated $12.6 billion to Hong Kong SAR China's economy, representing 3.6% of the city's GDP. Migrant domestic workers in Singapore also contributed to 2.4% of the GDP and 0.3% of the GDP in Malaysia. These are significant contributions. And these are only illustrative of the substantive contributions of migrant domestic workers to their host countries. Even while abroad, migrant domestic workers continue to care for their families and communities at home with significant remittances. Looking at the case of Indonesian migrant domestic workers in Hong Kong, China, Singapore, and Malaysia, they remitted $1.1 billion home in 2018 alone. So unpacking the statistics like this, it is clear that women migrant domestic workers are the backbone to economic and social development, both at countries of origin and destination. Today, we have come together to emphasize that domestic work is an essential activity that sustains our society. Domestic work guarantees the well-being of hundreds of thousands of families and directly supports a healthy labor force in the market. Business, as corporate citizens, are indeed benefiting directly from the domestic work sector. Responsible business can and should play an important role to empower domestic workers and promote their leadership. IOM and UN Women are delighted to convene this session featuring diverse speakers on what business is already doing and where there are opportunities to do more. So before I introduce you to our wonderful panel, I would like to thank all of you for joining today. I encourage you to take the opportunity to use the Q&A function to raise questions and also share your thoughts, research, and resources. Don't be shy and don't wait until the end. Your participation is greatly appreciated. So without further ado, allow me to introduce you to our 5 speakers. Tapati Saha, Program Coordinator of UN Women Bangladesh, has over 25 years of experience in international development and policy advocacy and gender equality. She is currently leading women's economic empowerment programming, which intersects the importance of women's empowerment and migration. Fish Ip, Asia Pacific Regional Coordinator of the International Domestic Workers Federation, IDWF, has over 20 years experience of organizing migrant domestic workers and was one of the founding organizers of Migrant Domestic Workers Trade Union in Hong Kong. Susan Clear, a regional director of Macquarie Group Foundation Asia, has a wealth of corporate, government, and nonprofit professional experience across Australia, Beijing, and Hong Kong. She is now leading the strategic grant portfolio of Macquarie Group Foundation to support migrant communities in Asia. Marie Kapduzi, General Manager of We Are Caring, an ethical recruitment agency in Singapore. Marie was born in France and raised in Singapore. Under her leadership, We Are Caring has successfully deployed over 3,000 workers without charging workers $1. And last, but certainly not least, Juleda Mijul is the Deputy Director General of Thailand Professional Qualification Institute. She has played an important role in strengthening collaboration with domestic and international partners by working with industries to develop relevant and responsive occupational standards, promoting recognition of skills for lifelong learning and inclusive development, and adapting best practices from abroad to best fit the labor migration context of Thailand, Cambodia, Lao People's Democratic Republic, and Myanmar corridors, so as to continuously improve the professional qualification system. Thank you all for being with us today. So my first question is going to go to Tapati Saha. As I shared in my opening remarks, domestic work is a dominant profession for many migrant women. It is my understanding that millions of South Asian women migrate to the Middle East each year, the majority in search of employment in the domestic work sector. Clearly, both domestic work and labor migration play an important role in empowerment. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, Tapati, but my first question is if you can share from your experience and expertise, could you elaborate more on the importance of domestic work to our society? How does labor migration contribute to migrant women's economic empowerment?
Thank you, Tara. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share my experience on this very important topic. As we already know that, I like to first express my opinion on your question. The importance of domestic work in our society. As we all know that domestic work is vital and foundational to human life. And the existence of human being is depending on the domestic work and care work, we all know. Every day we rejuvenate our body and mind and get ready to work outside home due to the domestic work and care work is actually doing by the mostly women in our home and society. But unfortunately, this important work is not given the same respect and value as we give respect and value to the work outside the home. To me, as we all know that in many countries, many destination countries and countries of origin and domestic work and workers are excluded from the labor rights and protection. Therefore, they're subject to so many discrimination, exploitation, and abuse. We know that actually the domestic work, these are very invisible, repetitive, laborious, undervalued, and undermined. It has no proper recognition, regardless to the status, whether it is paid or unpaid. When women do work as unpaid care work at home, it is not recognized. When they work as a domestic worker to the employer, due to the very much informal nature of the work, and also to me, it's because of the unequal power relationship with their employer, also the deep-rooted gender inequalities in the society. And the way we see and define the work, that actually also the very bias. We should see the work and define the work from the very much gender lens, and so that this discriminatory and the way we work that domestic and the public and formal and informal, then actually we can properly recognize this very valued and important work, mostly done by the women. Thank you.
Thank you, Tapati. I think you raised some incredibly important observations in terms of the deep-rooted gender inequalities in society, the power imbalances that take place within a domestic work-employer relationship. And you're absolutely right that until there is formal recognition of this work as work, it will be very difficult to affect widespread change. So I'd like for you to elaborate a little bit more from a gender perspective. So could you share the risks and vulnerabilities of domestic workers, especially in relation to their recruitment and employment in the region?
Thank you, Tara. As already I said that as a domestic worker, work is excluded from the labor law in many countries and the protection. Therefore, it has so many risks. And when women travel to abroad for the work, this group of women are less educated and there are less opportunity in their country of origin for the economic activity. Therefore, they took it's an economic pathway to contribute to their family and the society. But when they travel to the other destination country, often they fall into the risk because of this informal nature, because of the not recognize this work as a valued work. And also, I would say that the vulnerability start for the domestic worker from the pre-decision level. When the women take decision, mostly the women are pushed by their family, or they are subject to the violence, in gender-based violence at their family, and they are living under the crude reality and the poverty level. Therefore, they took this decision to going to the abroad, and also the recruitment process. And there are many good practices, of course, in the countries. There are many good practices with the recruiting agency, I would say, but there are some recruiting agency also, they have high charge for the recruiting, and they don't have any the formal procedure to follow. They don't have any standard procedure to follow for the recruiting. And when they arrive into the destination country, they don't have the standard employment contract. Even in many destination countries, there are some sort of contracts, but it is not implementing, it is not enforcing. And also the other part is that even there are some contract they have, it is not monitored by the either government or, and also there is some other issue. Often domestic worker don't have opportunity to have their own network to raise their voice. Often they live in a very isolation. That's why actually they don't have being gathered and some solidarity group, and there is no support group in the destination country as well, so that they can claim their rights. So because of this lot of reasons, they are vulnerable, and we know that they have the less salary, they don't have, they have to work long hours, they don't have the holiday to enjoy, whatever the entitled for any work. Mostly domestic workers are not entitled and not enjoyed when they work under the employer.
Thank you, Tapati. I appreciate you highlighting some of the many factors that exacerbate the vulnerability of migrant women domestic workers from pre-departure through recruitment and employment. And with recruitment, you hired things such as excessive fees, issues with contracts, lack of standardized contracts, contract substitution, and then of course the vulnerabilities associated with employment, and isolation is of course a really challenging factor. So these were all vulnerabilities that existed even before COVID-19. And to my next speaker, I'm going to ask for her to share a little bit more about what we are now seeing in terms of exacerbated vulnerabilities for domestic workers during COVID-19. So IDWF currently has 81 affiliates who are domestic worker membership-based unions, organizations in 63 countries. And since the COVID-19 pandemic, migrant domestic workers have been disproportionately affected, further exacerbating existing vulnerabilities. IDWF has been working to respond to the challenges domestic workers are facing and to protect their rights globally during the pandemic. So Fish, my first question for you is, based on your experience here in the Asia Pacific, what are you seeing in terms of the impact of COVID-19 on domestic workers?
Thank you for the question. Indeed, I'm very happy to be with all of you today to talk about an important question on how we together to protect human rights for everybody. And especially for domestic workers, they are one of the most vulnerable groups of workers. So we all have to be actively promote and protect their rights so that we are no more bystanders when they have abuses and exploitation. So thank you so much for having this platform to have sharing and learning together. And I'm the regional coordinator for IDWF in Asia region. In the world, we have 600,000 domestic workers organized with our international federation. So indeed, for migrant domestic workers organizing, despite many challenges that they face, they still have organized themselves. And we have affiliates and network group formed and led by migrant domestic workers in Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan, Malaysia, India, Thailand, and Singapore. And more migrant domestic workers have to be organized to have the mutual support with their own fellow workers. So for as our previous speakers has already mentioned, domestic workers are very much not recognized by the governments, especially in Asia Pacific, that they are not recognized as workers. So they are not within the framework of protection by the labor laws and policies. So before the pandemic, there are already many cases of abuses happening all the time. But the pandemic is just heightening the level of vulnerability of the domestic workers. And we face highest insecurity in this period of time. We face more discrimination in this period of time. Especially for migrant domestic workers, is more dimension of discrimination that they are facing as a person who are women, who are from poorer country, who have color and a different race and ethnicity. They face more xenophobia in the destination. So, for example, the migrant domestic workers leaders have been sharing to us how they were being discriminated by the employer. Whenever they go out, after they come back to their home, the employer requires them to take a bath immediately, and even the employer and his families is hiding before the domestic workers finish her bathing, and she has to. There was also story reporting that they have to clean the bathroom and toilet 13 times a day. There are really very extreme stories of discrimination that we have been hearing and shared by the migrant domestic workers. And I would say this kind of discrimination is also institutional. Some governments is also actively promoting these policies that are calling for the migrant domestic workers not to have day off when the employer is still going out around for shopping and bringing friends and families, relatives to home to have a dining, which increase the risk of infection of COVID-19. And the lockdown and everything has, when the domestic workers cannot have flight to take their annual leave to have a home holiday, they face a lot of homesickness, and they are more pressurized when the migrant domestic workers employers are more demanding on their work. They work longer hours, and of course, when the employees stay at home, they have to do more cooking. They are more stressed with these kind of heavier workload and long hours. Some of the domestic workers, especially when they have irregular status, undocumented migrant domestic workers, they have job loss immediately, and they lost all kind of income immediately. So we have a lot of seeking for help for only food and some, for example, milk for their babies during the pandemic when the total lockdown is going on, for example, in Malaysia. So, and the other thing is the problem is we don't enjoy social security. So when they have lost their job, they don't have anything. And also when sometimes when the government do not provide relaxed visa for them, then they are locked down, and then suddenly they will put into irregular status. So so I will end for this for the moment. Yeah.
Thank you, Fish. It is so difficult to hear about the highly discriminatory practices that you talked about and the way that workers are suffering during this period. But it is so important that we raise awareness as to what the reality of this is. And I certainly know that I speak on behalf of many people when we are so grateful for the work that organizers like IDWF do to try to provide support to these workers in situations like this. It can also be difficult to hear these stories because, as has been mentioned, domestic workers are so isolated from the community. You know, they're so under the thumb of their employers. So switching track a little bit, it would be great to hear from you in terms of ensuring that domestic workers are protected during the pandemic now, as well as beyond. What are some of the areas that should be priorities for business actors to get involved?
I think first of all, the main business sector involved on domestic workers are the employment agencies who do job referral and placement for the domestic workers. So they are the middle person to communicate with the employer and the domestic workers. So they can be an important agent to educate and also to give correct information to the employers. So it's very important if the business sector, the employment agencies, of course, first of all, they should have their own protocol and guide to ensure they have a healthy business environment, not to collect agency fee and excessive agency fee, and not to be a bystander when they see abuse and exploitation happening. And they can talk to the employers that not to terminate domestic workers during the lockdown period of time, and continue to pay the salaries, ensure that they can continue to contribute the health insurance and social security for the domestic workers. When the domestic workers is ill or sick or infected with COVID-19, please tell the employers to continue to pay for the sick leave of the domestic workers, and give information to the domestic workers on the COVID-19 and knowledge on the vaccination. And sometimes people have to get rest after taking the vaccine. Also promote the domestic workers to have a paid sick leave after the vaccination. So always to respect domestic workers' rights, to ensure that they have a safe and hazard-free workplace, and to respect the quarantine measures, and promote the employers to respect hygiene and social distancing measures, and give working hours flexibility to domestic workers when they face stress and pressure.
Great. Thank you for speaking to the important role of recruitment agencies. And I am delighted that we have a recruitment agency who will speak with us a little bit later to tell us more about what they are doing. But just to draw from what Fish said, that really, it's important for recruitment agencies to go beyond simply responding to grievances of workers, which is unfortunately not all agencies are even doing that. But to actually serve as mediators with employers to ensure that there is greater protection and support for current workers. So thank you so much for highlighting that, Fish. And staying with the discussion of, what can business do? What are current business efforts? I'm going to turn now to Susan. Susan, as part of, just a little bit of background, I guess, on why Susan is with us today. As part of its strategic grant-making program, the Macquarie Foundation in Asia has been supporting organizations providing better migration outcomes for migrant workers as a means to combat modern slavery. In particular, migrant domestic workers in this region is a strong focus for the Macquarie Foundation. The foundation has also supported the Fair Hiring Pledge to promote conscious and ethical hiring practices of migrant domestic workers. So Susan, my first question for you is, could you tell us why Macquarie Group has a strong focus on supporting migrant domestic workers in the region?
Tara, great to have the chance to connect with a wide group today. So thank you for the opportunity. Just first, let me tell you a little bit about Macquarie and then why our foundation has a focus on supporting migrant domestic workers in the region. So we're a global financial group. We're headquartered and listed in Australia with 17,000 employees operating in 32 markets all over the world. And we recently celebrated our 52nd birthday. And here in Asia, we have over 4,000 staff. And with our assets under management, we also employ an additional 59,000 people across the region. So the reach is pretty significant. And Macquarie's purpose, is we work to empower people to innovate and invest for a better future. And that really comes to life all across the organisation and very much through the Macquarie Group Foundation, which has been doing much of that for many, many years. We've been supporting the communities where our employees live and work really since our inception. And we've managed to contribute more than $360 million in this time. And that goes to thousands of organisations. And at the moment, we're, I think, at around 2,500 different nonprofits, which is a pretty diverse group of organisations to be supporting. And we do that through things like staff giving, through financial volunteering incentives, and also our global grant-making program. But what's relevant is underpinning all of this is really our staff-led grassroots philosophy. And that is a little bit, or very much, as to why we have this focus on supporting migrant domestic workers in the region. And it's behind much of the work that we're going to be talking about today. And so to take, again, a little bit of a step back, our interest in supporting migrant workers in Asia started back in 2014. We were, at the time, supporting many different organisations and causes, really across a range of areas. And we took a step back and we thought, how can we make better use of the resources that we have available to us, whether they be financial, which are obviously, a great and important part of anything, but also our skills, the networks that we have access to, and many other types of resources that we wanted to try and address the issues. So we went back and we looked at the existing areas of staff activity. So as I mentioned, we have this very strong staff-led philosophy to see what people were already interested in, where they were already being engaged. And then we compared that and mapped it out against what are some of the significant social issues that are affecting Asia. So this was, back in 2014, the concepts around modern slavery weren't perhaps as prevalent as they are today, but we recognised that it was a growing issue and one that perhaps wasn't receiving a huge amount of attention. So mapping that against our existing staff activity, we identified an opportunity around ways that we could support better migration outcomes for workers in the region. And then bringing it a little bit tighter around the domestic worker piece, we realised that the issue around modern slavery and the vulnerabilities faced by so many were really quite significant. And sadly, we have limited resources And so since then, we've been working to really focus our work on the locations and also the issues where we can amplify our efforts. So this comes to life from a location point of view, with the majority of our work being in Hong Kong, in Singapore, in the Philippines, in Indonesia, and in India. And we also have focused the efforts around migrant domestic workers because it's an area that staff can also readily apply and appreciate. And it allows us to really live our purpose and bring that to life.
Thank you, Susan. It is, I should say first, happy birthday to Macquarie. But it is just so wonderful to hear that not only have you fostered this culture of volunteerism and real engagement with the community, but that you have taken a highly strategic and evidence-based approach to prioritize your efforts in this space, your support to communities, and that through this, you as an organization have come to realize the essential nature of migrant workers, of women migrant workers, and of domestic workers. So I think this is all excellent. And I'm wondering now, with that, can you tell us more about how Macquarie Group has responded? So you came up with the strategy. Please tell us more about the kinds of activities that you are doing through staff engagement, and also, of course, through the Macquarie Group Foundation philanthropic efforts.
Absolutely. And I mean, also, Tara, you and I have known each other for a little while, and it's been fantastic to have the support of people and organizations across the region. I think something we realized early on was we absolutely were not the experts. And so we were kind of seeing what role we could play. And it's through relationships with IOM, others on this call, on this panel with us, who helped us to also achieve some of the things that we have. So as I mentioned, I think the staff piece is very important. And what we've done since starting back in 2014 is we've funded dozens of projects to date, which we're very proud of. So I think at the moment we've contributed, I think around over $3 million to dozens of different projects across the region, as I mentioned. So that touches on, as you mentioned, Tara, that regional research, which kicked us off. We worked with an organisation called CFAR, who have since done 2 reports, which is really trying to identify some of the issues that we can start to address. And they've gotten quite a significant and robust data, which is all publicly available. So you can certainly find that out, and we can certainly share some of the links to the CFAR reports. And as a result of that data, we identified interventions that we could start to address. So we're addressing some of the challenges, so we funded many of the projects from that. That information is also all on the website, and again, we can share a link to some of the frameworks that we're supporting, and you can check it out online. But back to the staff engagement piece, it really is at the core of what we do, and it was this staff engagement that led to the focus. So beyond the grant funding, which I just mentioned, we have staff personally involved in many causes. Some examples. Tara, you mentioned the Fair Hiring Pledge. So that was something that we were very supportive of. We funded the creation of, the putting it together, and we're, of course, a founding signatory, one of 8 signatories when it first launched, and we're now up to the Fair Employment Foundation have now got 22 signatories on board. There's always opportunities for more to sign. But the important piece from that is the thousands of people who've been educated through training sessions. And what's been great from that is that very significant increase in knowledge around ethical hiring. And I'm looking forward to hearing from Marie to talk a little bit around how that's come to life with We Are Caring. The other ways we get involved. Just today, we've installed 10 new laptops with Fair Employment, and we're currently working on a redesign of their entire Wi-Fi network connectivity. So again, trying to use the different skills and resources that we've got in the organisation. We also have staff volunteer with organisations. So for example, with financial literacy organisations, IDA based in Singapore and Enrich based in Hong Kong, where staff serve as mentors and trainers for the students. And we've also gotten involved, again, using the skills around creative services with their annual report design, or conducting UX user testing for the launch of Enrich's new website. We've done some language translation support. So all of this is designed to complement the programmatic grant funding that we provide centrally. And then finally, just next week, actually, we're launching Better Migration Week, which is an internal regional initiative that we're kicking off for the first time that's really designed to raise awareness and hopefully some funds around the wider issue of migration and why it's such a critical thing for us to be aware of, and to raise connectivity with our grant partners as well.
This is all brilliant, Susan. Thank you so much for sharing so many diverse examples of ways that Macquarie has, but other responsible businesses can also look to engage with staff, engage with the broader community around the issues of migration and migrant domestic workers. Definitely, if anyone from Macquarie is tuned in, please encourage your colleagues to post links to research, your website in the Q&A section. I'm also going to ask other people watching, again, don't be shy, do raise questions, share your own resources. The more active you are, the more lively this discussion will be. And now I'd like to go to Marie. So recruitment has been a theme that has come up, I think, through every speaker so far. And this is because recruitment agencies play an indispensable role to ensure the recruitment process is fair to both workers and employers. So established in 2016 as a social enterprise and a relatively new agency in the industry, We Are Caring has emphasized ethical hiring, paperless process, and employers' orientation and education. It was recognized by DBS NUS Social Venture Challenge among the top 120 social enterprises to watch in Asia in 2016, and also the winner of the ASEAN ICT Award 2018 in the category Making the World a Better Place. So Marie, thanks for being with us today. I have a couple of questions for you also, and my first question is really, what motivated We Are Caring to adopt the zero recruitment fees model for workers, while there are still so many agencies that charge fees to workers? And how do you see this debt-free model as driving broader change in the industry?
Thank you, Tara, and thank you to everyone on the panel as well. I'm really grateful to be here with everyone today. So like Tara said, we started 5 years ago, really with the goal to make it free and fair for domestic workers in Singapore to find a job. So for the context in Singapore, employment agencies can charge up to 2 months of salary deductions to the worker when they deploy them in a home. However, in practice, what we see is that it can be much, much more. So there's some workers that will go 4, 6, 8 months without having a salary paid because they owe the loan back to the agency. At the same time, the helpers will go through a very demeaning process when they register with agencies. They have to give their height, their weight. They all take the same photo and the same uniform for their bio data. And in Singapore, there's 2 key malls that are just agencies. And the helpers, they just go and wait. They sit on the floor of the agency and they wait for employers to come in and see if they will interview them. So the helpers were not getting a good experience. At the same time, what we saw is that the employers were not getting a good service either. They would only end up meeting the helpers that were in the office on that day. There was no transparency on the pricing that they were charged for the paperwork, but also the fees that the helpers were charged. And no transparency on the processes. All of this was also really slow. So nothing was digitalized. There was no e-signature. Most agencies did not have a website. So it was really an industry that had seen no innovation in 30 years. And we felt that we could have an improvement on both fronts. So making it better for the helpers, but also making it better for the families. In terms of the change in the industry, when we first launched, we got a lot of questions from agencies, but also from employers who would say, if there's no loan, how do I know that the helper will stay with me? Because if she has nothing to pay back, then why would she stay even a few months with me? And in the first year, we did not have enough data to support that actually, without the loans, she will stay longer with you. but it will also improve your relationship between the helper and the employer. So now that we've been doing this for 5 years, the Ministry of Manpower, they issue for each agency key ratings, including the customer service rating given by the families, and also the retention rate. So the helpers who stay more than 1 year with the same family after they were deployed by the agency. And for both of those, what we see is that we have the highest rating of the top 100 agencies in Singapore. And this it's really telling because it really shows on the industry level that when you make it free for the workers, when you give them a mandatory weekly off day, it makes the relationship on a more even footing. The helper, she's more motivated to work when she knows she has adequate rest and she's paid from the first month. And also on the employer side, we find them to be more satisfied with the agency, with the matching process, and also with their worker in the end.
Excellent. Thank you so much for making such a strong business case for ethical recruitment. It is excellent that you saw an opportunity in the market, you entered, and that your experience has demonstrated that actually ethical recruitment is good business and that it is good for workers and employers. In the region, we tend to see pushback on things like employer pays, and sometimes agencies, even though they have the best intentions, they feel that the demand from employers isn't there yet. And so I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit more. What has been the response from workers, but also employers to We Are Caring's efforts to promote ethical recruitment? What do you think it is about your approach that has contributed to the success that you described?
Yeah. So we're really grateful we got to grow really quickly. And this was almost entirely through word of mouth. So both from the employers, but also from the helpers directly. And this was really key because agencies will often advertise that they are free, but actually in practice, they are free only if you refer 3 friends to the agency and they will have salary deductions, or it's free to register, but then once you find an employer, the paperwork is not free. So we were lucky that from the very beginning, the helpers that we placed became ambassadors and advocates for us, and they really put testimonials out there and to their friends that it was free to be with us, and it was free also from abroad, which is generally where there's the really excessive fees that take place, and that they did not pay for their medical, for their training, for their flights, which sometimes is where there's gray area. So we really grew through our community of helpers and employers, and we did not have to do any marketing at all. So for the key aspects that contributed to the success, with the helpers, of course, being the first one and the only one to make it free for them with a weekly off day, was really key. For the employers, we really put a lot of effort on improving the services, improving the customer service, and the convenience for them. So like you mentioned in the introduction, making everything paperless, going digital, in the way that they find the helper. And also, like Tapati raised, it's also very important for the compliance to be able to have the contracts certified and that there's no amendments afterwards. The key part for employers was also the transparency that we provided, which in Singapore is rare, very rare still, for the agencies to publish their pricing online or to be transparent with the processes as well. So that was another key part. I think finally, when we first launched, we had 2 key services. We had one that was more traditional, where we would shortlist and organize the interviews for the families in more of a full package that traditional agencies would provide. And we had another package where the employers could go through our entire database of workers, shortlist by themselves, and have more ownership in their search. And very quickly, what we realized is that the families who were more independent in their search, they found faster, for way cheaper as well, and they ended up with a better match. So quickly, we shifted to this model only. And what we saw is that it's helpful for the employers when they look for their workers, because ultimately, even though we do pre-screening, we help them with the shortlisting. They know best who will work out in their home, and vice versa for the helpers. They should also have access to all the offers possible, meet the families, and then make their own decisions, because they're the ones who end up working in the home as well. So I feel like that was really key to our success as well.
Yeah, thank you, Marie, for highlighting so many important process considerations. And I think your experience with transparency is really important. And I also want to stress the significance of word of mouth. Actually, IOM this past year conducted a survey of 300 employers of migrant domestic workers and found that fewer than half did any due diligence on the agency that they decided to use. But those that did, the vast majority, the due diligence that they did was just asking friends and family. So that really is the network by which employers choose which agency they want to do. And of course, I think, we all recognize that it's similar for workers. Their most valued sources of information are their peers, which is why, as Fish mentioned earlier, it's so important that they have opportunities to organize. So thank you very much for these contributions. So my last couple of questions are to Julity, and Julity, I think you bring a really important perspective, because as a public organization, TPQI is chartered workforce with professional qualifications and occupation standards through different approaches. Domestic workers are often mistakenly seen as unskilled and unprofessional workforce. The assumption that the tasks are simple, routine, and easily handled. So it would be great to hear from you and TPQI's experience. Why are skills development and, importantly, recognition so important for domestic workers? And if you can also add, how is skills development and recognition for domestic workers also advantageous for employers?
Thank you, Tara. Thank you, UN Women, for inviting us to be part of the platform, to share and to learn from all panelists. First of all, by concept, skills development and certification help reinforce the fact that domestic workers is a real occupation that involves a wide range of skills such as cleaning, cooking, sometimes gardening, doing laundry, taking care of our beloved people in the family, our grandmother, father, and even our kids. So, and so on. So, undervaluation of domestic work results from a perception that the tasks of women traditionally do in their homes and the tasks of domestic workers are the same. So, however, domestic work requires, we think, many transversal and occupational skills. So skills training and recognition could help raising the status of domestic workers as recognized profession. So for domestic workers themselves, like any other occupation, skills development and certification lead to a greater opportunities. So domestic workers' skills overlap with skills of cleaner, hotel housekeeper, sometimes or personal care aide, as all panelists has mentioned. So if there's a way to recognize these skills, domestic workers could make use of them in the future.
For example, they could use skills certification to apply to be a cleaner in a cleaning services company, or even more sometimes, for the embassy. And that is their career path, for themselves, and could have a regular working hours and benefits for companies' employees. So without skills recognition and acknowledgement of new skills acquired by migrant domestic workers, they will be trapped, of course, in the never-ending cycle of unskilled work, vulnerability, poverty, and migration at the end. Additionally, skills development and certification contribute to empowerment. They attribute to personal growth and better participation in society, of course. So in terms of skill development, TPQI is working not only for Thai workers, but we are working for migrant workers as well. Going back to the example of migrant domestic workers, the skill training program by IOM for migrant workers and some employers help develop transversal skills such as foundational skills they can use when they change jobs, help them learn in many fields, and help them better integrated in the society. So finally, skills development of domestic workers mean they can do more for the employers. So let me tell you a few examples I have seen from our collaboration with the IOM and its partners. So one obvious example is language training. So of course, employers often pay more for domestic workers who can communicate because it helps with the work and the relationship with the employers or the family, of course. So another that I have seen is that domestic workers who have enrolled in basic elderly caretaker course could take proper care of the elderly care. At home. And one more example is a domestic helper who have participated in a cooking course from other organization or NGO. So their helpers can, cook better for them and learn some hygiene practices. So this is why we think that the skill development for them are very important to reinforce them in occupation and profession.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. And you have done such an excellent job of illustrating how valuable skills development, recognition, certification is, not only in the short term for workers and employers, but also thinking about the transferable nature of so many of these skills, how they are also skills for the future. And as you said, really empowerment of women workers. So you've already highlighted a few examples of TPQI's involvement in this space. I'm wondering if you can share with us, from your perspective, what still needs to be done to increase access of migrant domestic workers, especially women, to skills development and recognition schemes?
Sure. Well, TPQI is a public organization, so we are a government agency actually, so chartered to develop occupational standards, assess workers and learners against the occupational standards and competency standards, and award professional qualification. So whatever they have graduated from, we don't care. What we care is they can do the job. They are competent to achieve the job. So IOM and TPQI have worked together under the program called Promise. TPQI assess and certifies domestic workers and supports training according to the occupational standard. We are what we call e-learning or e-training with partners. If training is needed, of course, well, the IOM organize transversal skills training and works with partners to raise awareness of the benefit of skills certifications. So these work are complementary. The phase 1 of the Promise program has concluded successfully. It's done. And TPQI is delighted to see external evaluations feedback that certification that comes from skill assessment is crucial. So furthermore, skills certification by a government authority such as TPQI tells you that they have skill according to the occupational standard or our national standard. Certification has robust quality assurance mechanisms that ensures consistent outcomes, and it is accepted domestically and abroad. So the domestic workers could use them in Thailand and when they return to their home countries as well. So this is one of our goals that they could use the professional qualifications as a stepping stone to apply for jobs in the hotels or cleaning service companies or get further training so that they can break the poverty and migration cycle. We also get positive responses from business and employers for that. So when IOM organized a public and private committee meeting, the Thai employers stated clearly and that several sectors in Thailand depend on migrant workers, of course, as Thailand is still among the first countries of receiving country of the migrant workers. So, and they have been supportive of skills development. So the employers sometimes bore the burden and cost of training themselves, but they could only do so sporadically. So skill training and certification under the Promise program has helped skills development more systematic, more accessible for migrant workers, as well as more readily available for employers. So although many good things already happen, so there is always room for improvement. From our collaboration to recognize skills of migrant domestic workers, we found that one common challenge female migrant workers have faced is that they often have to juggle between working long hours and taking care of families. So they do not have time left for skill development anymore. So going to skill training could also mean workers don't show up for work and don't earn money. And in addition of the situation of COVID-19, that makes going to skill training harder. Therefore, it's timely we think about making greater use of online skills training. And with IOM, UN Women, and SDC, so we have launched what we call Mid-Thai, which means Thai Friendship, a platform that hosts useful information for migrant workers in migrant languages. So TPQI has supported this by providing our e-learning materials to be translated and put up on the platform called MidThai. So the migrant worker can learn more about many skills by the online. So the online learning could help enhance access to skills development because migrant workers could access it anytime, anywhere. So we could put more relevant skills training contents on more platforms. So furthermore, statistics show that women migrant workers have been more affected by COVID-19. So if we could think about making more online training contents specifically for this group to learn new skills for new jobs or even for develop themselves in other skills, so that could also help for them.
Thank you, Kunjulada, for sharing so many valuable insights that came from the evaluation of your experience so far, highlighting the proven significance of certification schemes, also the benefits of having public-private engagement around this issue to talk about what works and what doesn't. And I also really appreciate that you came to recognize the time limitations. You know, it's been said a number of times that migrant domestic workers are lucky if they get one day off a week. And of course, they often have other personal obligations to tend to. So creating that time to do skills development is so challenging. And so, you know, I would encourage any employers that are tuning in today to support domestic workers to be able to do skills development even on other days of the week. But I'm certainly glad to hear that there are new opportunities to leverage the increasing accessibility of the internet, especially through mobile devices, for migrant workers, for women workers to be able to access this very important skills training. Now, again, I'm going to encourage people from the audience to continue to ask questions, continue to upvote questions that are there. But before I go to questions from the audience, I do want to do sort of one rapid round where I'm going to ask one question to all of our speakers here today. And, you know, we have discussed in a variety of ways, we have recognized that migrant domestic workers are often neglected in the discussion of business and human rights. And it is likely because they are working in private households and are not directly employed by companies. Yet, as has been mentioned, across Asia, staff spanning multinationals to small and medium-sized enterprises can only go to work because they employ domestic workers in their homes for necessary childcare, elderly care, housework, and more. So our discussion has already begun to shed valuable light on how business can and has supported inclusion of migrant domestic workers in the broader business and human rights agenda. So my question to all speakers now is I will invite them to share one idea or one recommendation for business for what they can do to initiate today to inspire their community to care about the welfare of migrant domestic workers. So I'm going to welcome one call to action from each of you, and I'm going to mix the order up a bit. So Fish, I'm going to ask you to share your recommendation first.
Thank you. Really, human rights for everybody is on all of us, on our hands. So let's work together and ensure all the employment agencies like the We Are Caring company in the Singapore that has proven that having a private employment agencies can help to promote human rights and to avoid unhealthy competition by diminishing or in promoting abuses that is faced by the migrant domestic workers. Join with us to promote and call the governments to ratify the International Labour Convention 181 on private employment agencies and promote the following, promote the government to have regulatory framework and laws and policies to ensure the private employment agencies are following a code of practice and to have a adequate protection and prevention of abuses. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Fish. Marie, please share your recommendation.
I think I will just add on to what Fish said. I think the role of agencies is really critical for us. I think also getting more conversations between the agencies and businesses that have staff that employ domestic workers is really key. And to engage with them directly to see how them and their employees can address these issues practically is key, because if they're not aware of the solutions, they cannot decide that they can that they can be part of the solution afterwards. So I think the FAIR pledge that was mentioned before is a good example of this. For us, we don't have formal agreements with companies like this, but we do engage with businesses and also embassies that refer their staff directly to us, because they like the ethical aspect. And also, if you have a high-level executive or diplomat, you need to know that you're hiring will be the right one from the start, and that the helper is trained and can handle the domestic life so that you can go on with your duties with the business. And for those families, when we walk them through the responsibilities of having a helpers, often their first-time employers, they were not aware of the legal deductions that can take place in Singapore, what it's like to manage a helper, what the hiring process is like. So I think more collaboration, like Fish said, between the public and the private sector. But for me, I think between businesses and the employment agencies is really key to commit to being a positive influence.
Great, thank you. Tapati, what's your recommendation?
Yes, thank you, Tara. Actually, as we know that gender equality is really critical to business performance and also sustainable economic growth globally. So we say that equality means business. So I think that, and we have the very good example what actually already we heard from the panelists about the ethical recruitment and the business. So business can really contribute in this area to supporting domestic migrant workers, particularly to empowering them with the information and skills, I think, and also the partnership with the government. That is also really important. But I would say that they could more come up with their innovative idea to empower migrant women with the new skills like the digital skills, financial literacy, and other things. Yeah, that would be my recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you. And Kuntuleda, what's your recommendation?
So, well, I would say that if you are a recruitment agency, so maybe please think about organized pre-departure or post-arrival training, so that it could help with skill matching for migrant workers. So as TPQI, we got requests from cleaning service companies, for example, and domestic worker recruitment agency to help them to align their training program with the occupational standard. And they told us that the alignment would help with marketing, of course. So training and certification certainly helps migrant domestic workers, and it will also help improve companies' images, increase values of their services, and at an advantage over other companies. The other thing is, if you are in the business that are related to domestic work, you could consider hiring returned migrant domestic workers, as it's undeniable that there are a good number of migrant workers who have had to return to their home countries, especially during the COVID-19 situation. So there are a pool of skilled, competent, and experienced workers. Public and private partners could support recognition of prior learning or recognition of their skills, and a business could hire them. So this will, help returned workers with reintegration and help supply productive and competent workers to the business. So this is what we recommend.
Excellent concrete recommendations. And I also appreciate that you touched on the considerations of recognizing that many migrant workers are not long-term, right? That at some point they will need to return home, and it's good to think about actions that can support their positive return and reintegration. And Susan, what is your recommendation?
Hard going last in the situation. There's lots of fantastic ones already shared. Maybe I'll share two from my side, and one is to encourage people to use your voice. So it's been touched on a lot today that, a lot of the domestic workers don't have the same access, and ability to affect that change. And I think everyone on this call and all of our networks, so you can use your voice as an individual with your own personal networks, but also within your own companies, to try and raise awareness. It's through organising training sessions or inviting some of the speakers who are with us today to come and talk to your organisation and your wider employee group to just raise that awareness. Something we've found since we've started working in this space has just been, I suppose, things that we assume everybody knows just aren't. And so you can never communicate enough, and you can never share the information enough, because there's always people who don't know. And related to that is for the corporate organisations on the call who aren't sure where to start. Everyone's at a different stage of the journey, and I'd really encourage you to reach out to others that you see who are doing some work and get some tips from them. There's no need to start from the beginning and to try and reinvent the wheel. And I think there's huge resources. Every organisation on this panel has got great access to resources, lots of information to share, as well as speaking to groups. So very, happy to share our journey in more detail with anyone who wants to find out more about some of the things we've done as well. So yeah, just try and continue to raising awareness in any way that I think we can is a great call to action, hopefully.
Brilliant, and I love that your offer to share from your experience and encouraging connectivity between all of us on the call today, everyone tuning in. I think that's such a nice. It's an excellent call to action, recognizing that we can all help each other in this really important journey. So I am delighted that we still have time for questions. There are a number that have come through. And so I'm going to share kind of 3 questions with the panelists now, just so you can start thinking, and then I will call on you individually to respond to them. So one question really stems from Susan's first recommendation to use your voice. And the question is, what can we do as individuals? And I think this question is especially relevant thinking about some of the xenophobic and discriminatory attitudes and practices that we're seeing. So I'd like our panelists to start to think about what your response might be to what can we as individuals do. Another important question is recognizing that employers of migrant domestic workers are individuals. They are not companies. And so what can we do? What kind of advice would you give to enhance a professional relationship between employers and their migrant domestic workers? What kind of advice can we give to really try to formalize that relationship within the home so that it does carry more of the respect and dignity afforded to the work that it is? And the last question that I hope we have time for is how do we incentivize companies to engage with their employees especially those who hire migrant domestic workers. So we've heard wonderful examples from Macquarie and other speakers around the importance of companies engaging with their employees as employers. But how do we inspire companies to start that journey? In addition to this conversation, of course, hopefully we'll be inspiring a lot of companies off the back of this. So yeah, there were 3 questions there. What can we do as individuals? How do we encourage a more professional relationship between employers and their domestic workers in the home? And how do we incentivize companies to engage with their employees as employers? So that first question as to what can we do as individuals, I might ask you, Tapati, to respond to that first. What would you encourage just each of us as individuals to do to try to increase the protection of migrant domestic workers in our community?
Thank you, Tara. As you asked, as individual, what can we do? Actually, as individual, actually we can create space for women migrant workers so that they can get gathered and they could have some solidarity among the other women migrant workers. So in this way, they could be empowered. So I would like to say that we can create space for them so that they can exchange their views, they can share their experience. As you know that women's experience as women, as also worker, that is very important, and they always have different kind of experience than men at every stage of life. So if they can share their experience with other workers, other women, and form the solidarity group, that would be very empowering for them. That actually I really would like to do for them as individual.
Thank you. I think that's such an important recommendation, to create that space for women to connect with other women. And so certainly, for current employers to ensure that their domestic workers have at least 1 day off a week to spend where and how they choose, and with their peers, including during COVID-19 and even with social distancing measures. I think that's a very good consideration. And I see Fish nodding. So Fish, I might ask you next is, what would you add to that? What would be your recommendation for us as individuals to consider?
It's a very sweet and caring question. Indeed, we have to care around and not to be bystanders when there are abuses and exploitations happening around. In IWF, we are promoting a campaign called My Fair Home Campaign. And individual is not only individual. If we can connect individuals together to be collectively to build fair home everywhere, and we can have our fair homes together. And what does it mean is, first, if you yourself is an employer or a family member of an employer of domestic workers, you can always do a lot. First, to really see the workers as workers, not maid, not slaves or servants, but it is a worker just like you and me, working in just companies, etc. But the work of these domestic workers, their workplace is in private households. So meaning, imagine if you can put yourself in the position of the domestic workers as workers, what will it happen? What do they expect? Like fair wages, having rest is very important. You cannot expect a person to work 24 hours to be standby 24 hours a day and have no day off. And there should be fair social security. There should be time for them to be live like a human being, like what Julada has shared, that they should also learn and have some learning and to have a personal growth as well, just like you and me. All of us need to have healthy and decent work together. So we hope all of us can contribute to this, to have My Fair Homes together. And with IWF and our domestic workers unions and organizations, we also from time to time got requests or call from other people who are non-employers, like security guard or a neighbor of an employer of domestic workers who witness or have doubt when abuse or exploitations are happening. Because in the neighborhood, you can always see the domestic workers next door, how she looks like, whether she is healthy, whether she is happy or very much depressed. If we can stay watchful in the neighborhood to these vulnerable and domestic workers, we can always help, and you can always call the domestic workers organizations in the destination country, and we can always help and really give space to the domestic workers to have the time together to form their organizations so that they can have a voice and to enjoy their proper life and human life together. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Fish, thank you so much for telling us all about the My Fair Home campaign. Also, I think your encouragement for us to practice empathy and really to put ourselves in others' shoes when we think about some of the decisions that we are making and the treatment that we are practicing. I think that's all so important. And of course, also, you know, you've said it a couple times already that we should not be bystanders. If we suspect that someone is in a bad situation, we should reach out. We should do what we can to make sure that they're okay, or if they can get help if they need it. I'm mindful of the time, so I'm going to move to the next question around recognizing that employers of domestic workers are individuals. What can we do to enhance a professional relationship between employers and migrant domestic workers? And Juletta, I'm wondering if you could make a first attempt to answer this. What would be your advice to really strengthen that professional relationship between an employer and a domestic worker within the home?
Thank you. I think if mentioned a lot already about that. You know, allow if the employer allow domestic workers to, well, respect them is one. Respect the right of the worker is one of the most important things. Giving them times, have their own space, have access to the internet to learn by themselves, to have their own time, let them to go wherever they want, maybe on Sunday, to see their friends, their community, same nationality. So that would enhance a great relationship, a great, I would say, something that, well, when we need to consider our domestic worker as one of a member of our family. Actually, in Thailand, we have a lot of families where domestic workers belong in terms of the family. So we give them the opportunities to do things by their own, to go out, to learn, to watch TV with the family. So this is the important thing, and to treat them as one of human being in the family. So, and they need to know, especially you can share as employer the rights or even the security, social security for them, help them to be in the society with, proudness of their work. This could help them. This could help the employer and the domestic worker to have a great relationship professionally, and mentally as well.
Thank you. I totally agree. I think the fact that you opened your response with respect is so important, to respect the workers as workers, to respect their time, their space, their decision making, the skills that they have, the contributions they make, and to also ensure that there is comfort. And I think the only thing that I could add is, I think one of the things we have found is that positive communication, right? Creating a communication schedule where employers and workers sit down together once a week or once a month to discuss scheduling, what's working, what's not working. That really fosters the comfortable environment that you spoke to, Kunjulita. So excellent. And now I'm going to move to the last question around really how to incentivize companies to engage with employees, especially those who hire migrant domestic workers, as employers. And Susan, I'm going to ask you first. You've shared a lot of examples, and I'm wondering, having been at the start of the journey for Macquarie, how would you suggest that we incentivize other companies to join up?
And it's a hard one to try and tackle. And I think, like I said before, I think reaching out and learning from others is a great way to go. But I think one of the maybe secrets to success was the strong support and engagement we had from leadership at the top. Our regional CEO was very supportive of this issue and was very willing to put his name against the initiative to be kind of a key champion. And I think that has played a huge role in the success, in the fact that it was important enough to get his attention and to be included then in a range of communications, and around the way that he was able to also, I suppose, use that influence and network beyond Macquarie. And there was an element, I think, around a reputation, enhancing a reputation is an important part of it. Slightly related is it's not, I think people often see competition as a negative thing, but I think there's an element of kind of encouraging others in an almost competitive spirit to push themselves to raise the bar. And it's not about meeting the minimum. And I think, here in Hong Kong, there's a minimum wage for migrant workers. And I am always astounded that this isn't the minimum wage, for your entire career as a domestic worker, no matter how many skills you gain or experience you have. And, and I think it's raising the bar. And I think we've tried to do that as well with some of the engagement we've had, where we've said it's not enough to just be hiring. You want to be hiring ethically. And so I think by facilitating some of that, so as an incentive, seeing that, Macquarie has signed the Fair Hiring Pledge, and that has then encouraged other people to sign the Fair Hiring Pledge. So I think, using some of that external branding, that reputation, and not looking on it as a negative, but I think a really positive way to just raise the profile is one way that we can certainly incentivize companies. And the other piece that we, and maybe it's not necessarily an incentive for companies, but it's an incentive for the employees to get involved, and it touches on a little bit of the two questions earlier, is around that connectivity with the fact that migrant, the helpers are not just helpers. That's how they're seen, maybe, in many cases, unfortunately, in a home. But things like the Migrant Stars campaign that was run in Hong Kong last year, the Helper documentary that was put out a couple of years ago, just I think show that there's much more to these women in the large part than just what people are seeing. So I think they could be some ways that we could help to incentivize companies and their employees to understand more.
Excellent. Thank you, Susan. And Marie, I'm going to challenge you to respond to the same question, maybe in terms of incentivizing recruitment agencies in 30 seconds.
Okay. So maybe super quickly, we do see more and more that there are agencies either in Singapore or abroad also that are starting to shift to this model. Most agencies, we need to recognize, are very small agencies. Generally, they have a small volume of activity, but this model can really help them differentiate their offering from the other agencies. For the older, bigger agencies that are more using the traditional model, it will take longer for the change to take place, in part because this model is very disruptive to their existing businesses. So they don't want to cannibalize themselves almost when their existing business is very profitable. So it will be hard for them for everyone to make the switch, but we are seeing some progress. And also with COVID, with agencies not being able to operate in the traditional way, with the offices being closed, everyone having to shift to digital and being forced to optimize their processes and to innovate. We do see that actually there are some changes, and the agencies are encouraged to innovate, and ultimately it will lead to people shifting to the employer pays models and fairer practices, because when we look at the statistics and the results, the customers are happier, the helper are happier, and the retention is also longer. So I think definitely over time we're seeing some progress.
Excellent, and I'm so glad that we are ending this incredibly robust and inspiring discussion on a note that highlights, as hard as the past year and a half has been, that there has been some silver lining and perhaps some innovation, and changing the way business as usual is done will just continue to happen and will help us all to build back better. So unfortunately our time is up. So on behalf of IOM and UN Women, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to all of our inspiring panelists, as well as all of you for joining today and your excellent participation. As we heard today, there are ample opportunities for responsible business to proactively promote the welfare of migrant domestic workers in our communities. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and do take care.